a lot of these criminal dictators come up with very good aphorisms, frankly. And one that Lenin came up with is that there are, let me see, to get it exactly right, there are years when nothing happens and weeks when years happen, or words to that effect.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Doug Casey. I've known about Doug Casey for many, many years. I've always admired his wisdom, knowledge, and his philosophical approach to government and to things in general. Doug, welcome to the channel.
Thanks, Mario. It's a pleasure to be here with you, although as we speak, I'm in Buenos Aires. Uh, I've lived here part of the year for, goodness, almost 20 years.
Yeah, I've known that you've been down there, and I remember a few years ago I looked into your ranch or estancia. Is that Cafayate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a development that I put together in the northwest of Argentina, uh, in a small town called Cafayate, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it was supposed to be something like a little gulch, very international and upmarket in character. And as any real estate development will do, it's made my life miserable. But it's been an aesthetic success, and I think it'll eventually turn out to be a financial success too, against all odds. So yeah, I spend a good part of the year in Argentina, more of the year in Uruguay, and I still spend part of the year in the U.S. Although, frankly, I don't think I want to spend too much of this coming year, 2024, in the U.S. It could get a little bit wild and woolly.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, what do you think will happen? I know it's difficult to forecast things in the US in terms of politics, economics, finance, and maybe also here in the UK and the rest of the world in this coming 12 months.
Yeah, well, almost anything can happen this time. I think that uh, Lenin was right. Uh, a lot of these criminal dictators come up with very good aphorisms, frankly. And one that Lenin came up with is that there are, let me see, to get it exactly right, there are years when nothing happens and weeks when years happen, or words to that effect. And I think 2024 has a good chance of that being true. Uh, we're on the we're on a razor's edge financially, economically, uh, socially, politically, in many countries in the world today. And uh, I've been predicting for a long time. I hate to use the word predict. That sounds like you have a crystal ball. You're supposed to sound legitimate. You're supposed to say forecasting. That sounds so much more uh, scientific. But I felt for years that a massive economic depression was inevitable for all the reasons that depressions happen. And I think we're right at the edge of it right now. Uh, what's going to happen in the US? Because this is an election year in the US, and we're looking at something vaguely resembling political chaos. Uh, so, who are going to be the candidates running for office? We don't know that. The Democrats have Biden, who is who's senile. He's demented. He's not a very intelligent person. And I think he's being controlled by the people under him because he doesn't know if he's up or down. I don't think they'll run him, though. That would just be too much of an insult to the intelligence of the American people. which incidentally I don't have a lot of respect for. So don't know who the Democrats are going to run, but the Democrat Party is the party of Jacobins. They're very much like the Jacobins in France in 1789 to 93. Who will the Republicans run? Well, Trump appears to be in the lead. And, you know, I'm not terribly opposed to Trump. I am terribly opposed to Biden or any Democrat. Not terribly opposed to Trump because at least he's a cultural conservative. He doesn't have a philosophical core of any type. He's an opportunist. He'll blow at the wind. Anything that seems like a good idea to him is something that he's perfectly willing to impose upon the party politic. But at least he's a cultural conservative. He doesn't want to radically upset the country, which the wokesters definitely want to do and the Democrats want to do. So you got that. And then you've got Bobby Kennedy, uh, who's JFK's uh, uh,
Nephew.
well, nephew, right? And he's building momentum. And he seems like a more or less decent human being. Uh, very few decent human beings exist in politics, quite frankly. Uh, and there are other things that are happening out there. There's a group called No Labels. I don't know if you hear about this much in the UK, but people with a lot of money and a lot of power are trying to put together a like a third party with people that would be acceptable to everybody. Well, it's a ridiculous idea because we're in the midst of a culture war, a philosophical war, and you can't just get nobodies that don't have any views that will be acceptable to anybody. But I'm not totally convinced that we'll even have an election in 2024, depending on whether we have World War III. So anyway, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've listened to it years ago, your interview with Phil Donahue, and that was one day before the 1980 election. And I think you told the audience you're not going to vote, and they all booed, I think. And you said, do you see things getting better? People just always want someone to come and help them. And it seems to be the same, it's still the same situation now. It just doesn't seem like people learn that they have to look after themselves and not wait for someone on a white horse to help. And we've got here in the UK as well an election that's supposed to be called in, well, it will be called in 2024. And people think that Keir Starmer, who's the Labour candidate, that he will do something better. But to me, it seems I agree with you. I've never really voted because there's an old saying that if voting mattered, it would be illegal. So, yeah, that's interesting. So, what do you think about the economy and the financial markets? Maybe gold and silver. How do you see that? And the dollar and the fact that the BRICS, they're not really ganging up against the dollar. They're just trying to find an alternative.
Yeah, well, the dollar itself is a floating abstraction. It's an IOU nothing on the part of a bankrupt government. And the US government is bankrupt. It's manifestly bankrupt. The official disclosed debt is $34 trillion. But there are a lot of contingent liabilities that they'll have to pay for, and a lot of accounting that goes into the future that they have no funding for. So that it's really quite impossible for the US government to pay its debt. And at this point, even paying its current expenses, because the annual deficit is running at right 2 trillion a year. And with interest rates at these higher levels that they are now, and I think interest rates are going higher, although I hesitate to predict the direction of interest rates. I can tell you a joke about that. actually. Uh, Nobody's successful in predicting interest rates. But that said, they're going higher. And it used to be that the US government could fund its deficits from the nice Japanese or the nice Chinese. But no, they don't want to do that anymore. In fact, they want to get rid of the dollars they have. So basically, if the US government spends something, uh, it floats a bond, but who buys the bond? They sell it to their central bank, the Federal Reserve, who buy the bond and credit the US government's accounts with commercial banks. And that's how it works. That's how inflation works in the US, or currency debasement works. Those bonds will never be repaid. They're trading sardines. They're not eating sardines. So that's part of the reason for my taking a gloomy outlook on the economic and financial future.
Yeah, so I thought we'd go through some questions and to let the viewers know, Doug has got a YouTube channel called Doug Casey's Take, and I highly recommend it. He does this kind of Q&A and chat with Matthew Smith. So I guess I'm gonna do something similar. It's not, I guess, an original idea, but yeah, I think it's a good one because a lot of the viewers wanted to ask Doug a question. And first, though, I have some questions from myself. First one, Doug, is why do you think President Ford legalized gold again on January 1st, 1975? I mean, I'd never thought of that. I just thought you might know the reason why, because it had been banned by FDR since 1933.
Yes, which was a criminal default in itself, quite frankly. Uh, the US could no longer support a $20 price per gold. And FDR raised it to 35. And in 71, uh, uh, foreign central banks were trying to redeem all the gold that they could at the $35 nominal price. And so Nixon closed the gold window and defaulted on the promise to redeem gold at that, and gold ran to $200 an ounce subsequently. So why did Ford legalize it again? I think uh, from a philosophical point of view, these people think that gold is a pet rock. Uh, they don't think that it's actually money. They think it's a figment of the imagination. Uh, uh, they think it's something that is idiotically mined from the ground in South Africa, which at the time used to be the world's largest gold producer, to be put back in the ground in Fort Knox, which, if you phrase it that way, makes no sense at all. I think that uh, it, it was an indication on their part that, well, you might as well own gold because it's not really money. I mean, you can own copper, you can own wheat. So I think, okay, you can own gold too. It was they're trying to say that it's nothing special, and of course I'm so glad that it was legalized again, because before that Ford dictate, Americans could only buy gold in the form of historic or collectible gold coins with large premiums. So yeah, it's floating again. And will they illegalize gold once again? Will they confiscate Americans' gold once again, which Roosevelt did? Anything is possible when you're dealing with government. I think it's unlikely, though. I suspect what's going to happen is gold is going to be remonetized, because all the world's currencies are toilet paper. They really are. Uh, and the world is going to go back to gold. I mean, look, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Indians, they're all trying to get out of the dollar because they realize it's a hot potato. Uh, so will they use each other's currencies to trade with each other? Well, they don't trust each other's paper money, each other's fiat money. So they'll have to, in order to trade with each other, they'll use something that they all accept. And gold is uniquely well suited for being money and has been for, well, at least 2,500 years, since the first gold coins were minted in Lydia in, well, around 600 BC. So, yeah, we're going to see gold remonetized. And when that happens, it's going to be at a much higher price, I think, than where it is today. Even though right now, as we speak, gold is kind of reasonably priced at 2,000.
Yeah. Um, Another question, you might find this one interesting. Uh, do you think indulgences and carbon credits are similar? And by that I mean back in the Middle Ages and up until like I think the 1800s, the Catholic Church made, well, a fortune, you know, absolving people from their sins by selling indulgences. And now we've got this new kind of religion, the climate religion and carbon credits.
Yeah, it's a scam. It really is. It's it amounts to an indirect tax on the people of the world, making the price of fuels much more expensive. And of course, this whole thing with greenism and climate change and so forth, it's a religion. It's worse than a religion, actually. It's a mass hysteria uh, where it would appear that most people have been propagandized into believing that the world is going to catch fire because of, and it's completely ridiculous. I mean, you know, the other day here in Argentina, I was talking to a chap, uh, and he about the carbon hysteria, and he said, "Well, it's 3% of our atmosphere, and it's going higher." And I said to him, "No, it's not 3%. It's 0.04%, barely enough for plants, which need it to survive, to live on. If it went down much further, uh, we'd have a mass die-off of plants." I mean, people don't even understand the basics about this. Anyway, the climate has been changing on planet Earth for roughly 4.5 billion years, and it'll continue changing. But carbon is not an enemy element. It's the basis of all life. And from a geological point of view, we're at geologically very, very low levels today. So it's a scam.
I agree. I agree 100%. One question I have would be if you had to like pick three books, if you had to run away from Argentina, but I guess you'd have a place to go because you have places everywhere. But if you didn't and you had to take three books, which would they be?
Hmm. Well, I am a fan of Shakespeare. I would take the Complete Shakespeare, which is available in one large volume. That would certainly be one thing that I would take. What else would I take as a book? A single volume book? Hmm. I'm not sure I've been asked that question before. But you know, due to the wonders of the computer, you can get almost all the great books of the Western world. It'll take you hours, depending on your internet speed, to download thousands of the best classical books that have been written by the West over the past 2,500 years. I guess I would take a Kindle with those books downloaded into it. I guess that's the answer.
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard the theory that Francis Bacon was actually William Shakespeare?
Yeah, people have been debating for a long time. Who actually was Shakespeare? Was it actually Shakespeare was Shakespeare, or was it William de Vere, or was it Francis Bacon? And there are other candidates that have been put up there.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but whoever it was a genius for the ages.
Yeah.
But we know about Shakespeare, you and I, but kids that go to university today, I'm not convinced they know very much about Shakespeare because the nature of university classes has been mutating and changing over the last couple of generations. Uh, and for every course in gender studies or sociology or something of that type, that's less room for courses in the classics. In fact, you mentioned the Donahue show that I was on in 1980, the day before the national elections. And it's true that the audience booed me when I said I wasn't going to vote. And I told them why I wasn't going to vote the next day. And that led to an interesting discussion with Phil. The other thing that they booed me about was, and I think they generally liked me, except for these two things, was it came up and I said that I regretted having misallocated 4 years of my time and a bunch of money going to university. And university back then, when I went to school, it was the 60s, was a vastly different thing than it is today. Um, so I don't feel so bad about misallocating that 4 years of time and that money back in the 60s. But to go to college today is actually the height of stupidity. Not only do you either bankrupt your parents or turn yourself into an indentured servant. I'm talking about American universities. I know it's not nearly the same thing in England and Europe as it is in the US, but if you go to a so-called first-rate university in the US, the 4 years are going to cost you about $300,000. You might get a scholarship for part of that, but you're not going to be earning much money during that time either. So you're putting yourself way behind the eight ball with 100 or 200,000 or whatever dollars to pay off and lost time. And worse is the indoctrination that you'll get because university teachers today are almost universally socialists, Marxists, or some other variety of collectivism. And when a kid is 18 and goes to college, he tends to believe what the professor says, who's knowledgeable and experienced. He's paying all this money to listen to him. So these people have corrupted a couple of generations of youth, and it's gone down to the high schools and the grade schools. This adds to my gloomy outlook for civilization generally.
Yeah. Another topic here, a question I wanted to ask you, bullion versus miners, how gold mining companies, exploration, how it's completely different. Maybe you can explain to the viewers because you can get burnt with the miners, and bullion, of course, is a different story.
Yeah. Well, I've been involved in gold and silver since, actually, I'll tell you when I got involved. I read Harry Brown's book, who became a very good friend of mine. And Harry was a bit of a genius, I've got to say. He wrote a book called You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation. And it was published in 1970, and it accurately predicted why gold was going much higher. I read the book, and I didn't have much money back then. I was just out of school. But at the same time, gold was nominally like $35 an ounce. So I've been buying gold as a savings vehicle since then. And it's been a very good savings vehicle. It's gone up more than 50 times in price. And I think that's how people should use gold today, as a savings vehicle. Don't use dollars, don't use pounds, use gold coins. Gold stocks, which I've been involved in for almost as long, are a very different proposition. Very different proposition. Uh, they're a highly, highly leveraged way to play the price of gold. Uh, and I've personally owned gold stocks, a couple that have gone 1,000 to 1, not just over the course of a lifetime, but over the course of 3 or 4 years. They're very volatile. They're more volatile than computer stocks or internet stocks are. And right now, as we speak, they're at one of their cheapest levels ever. So I think they're an excellent speculation, but they're not an investment. They're a speculation. But right now, I think they're a superb speculation.
Especially the small exploration ones, or all of them?
Well, exploration stocks, they're on an Easter egg hunt where geologists are wandering through the wilderness looking for Easter eggs, and the odds don't favor them finding what will ever turn out to be an economic deposit of any mineral. Uh, Less risky uh, are the development stocks, where they've actually found something and they're working on it, trying to prove it up. They know the deposit's there, they know the gold is there, let's say, but is it of the right grade? Is it of the right amount? And many other factors to make it economic to mine. And then, of course, you have the producers that are actually cranking it out. And right now, uh, the average cost for mining gold is hard to define. You've got the cash cost of bringing it out, but then there are other costs, administrative and environmental, and the cost to close the mine up and things like that. And the total costs of mining gold, from soup to nuts, amortizing everything and closing the mine up after it's mined out, averages in the industry today probably about $1,200 per ounce. So if gold is at 2,000 and the total cost of mining is 1,200, gold mining is a profitable business today. So and right now there are quality gold stocks that are yielding 4 or 5%, sometimes more, in dividends. Very unusual. Although the first gold stocks that I made a hit on were South African gold stocks back in 1976. And, I was interested in making a lot of money as quickly as possible, as everybody is, obviously. But I was very young then. And in 1976, it looked like South Africa was going to collapse. There were these huge riots in Soweto, a suburb of Johannesburg. And at the same time, the same day, gold fell out of bed. It had gone up as high as, see, this is 76. It went as high as $200 an ounce in 74, and it fell to $103.50. I happen to remember that on the same day. And the South African gold stocks fell out of bed. And the stocks that I wanted to buy and did buy were names that no longer exist. Grootfly, Bracken, Leslie, they're all gone. But they had current dividend yields of 50 and 60%. And from there, the dividends doubled and doubled and doubled again. So my first real experience with gold stocks was very, very good. And I think we could have an experience like that again. Not quite as good as that was, but pretty good. Most of the gold stocks in the world are traded in Canada. About 80% of all the financing and trading and everything for gold stocks is done in Canada. So
Great. We're going to skip now to the questions from the viewers, but before we do, just wanted to ask you about what's happening in Argentina. I mean, I heard of Milei actually last year, I think when he was, or the year before, he was elected to the Congress in Argentina, and he was like unknown as a politician. And they said, well, the guy is a Rothbard fan. He's an Austrian libertarian narco-capitalist. I said, wow, that's great, but he'll definitely not win and become president. And then all of a sudden he wins. And there's a lot of speculation now in on social media that he's been bought and paid for and that he's not going to do the things he promised, like shutting the central bank and other things. And so I wanted to ask you, I know it's early. He's been in office for just over a week. You can't really judge what he's going to do. But the other thing is Argentina is such a basket case that it's not hard to improve the situation.
Yeah, all true. And that's why Milei got elected. It's not like the average guy in the street voted for him because they like and understand libertarian and anarcho-capitalist philosophy. That's not the reason. The reason is that he's an excellent showman, and he's very demonstrative about what he wanted to do, which is destroy the political caste uh, and totally reform the country from top to bottom. And most of his support comes from young people in Argentina who realize that they've been screwed, that there's no opportunity in this country, no capital in the country, because nobody but an idiot, well, like myself, I was way too early, would put money into this country. The regulations are everywhere and they're brutal. The taxes are high. The inflation is out of control. It's a very nice country, kind of living on its past glories. But the reason Milei got elected was because people were just so fed up with the legacy of Juan Perón, who came in after the end of World War II and was a huge admirer of Benito Mussolini and to a lesser extent of Adolf Hitler, and structured the economic system in this country after Mussolini's Italy, so that the state has its grimy fingers in absolutely everything. So that's why Milei was elected. And happily, now, so is he going to be captured by this state that he said he was going to eliminate? Well, I don't know Milei personally. I'll meet him in the future, no question. But we have a number of common friends. In fact, a book which I was responsible for. It's a long story. The book is called The Market for Liberty. When he read it, he, at that point, started identifying as an anarcho-capitalist. So is he sincere? Yes. I'm convinced that he's completely sincere about wanting to abolish the state. And if you keep a state around, it should only, since the state is congealed violence. I mean, it's coercion. That's what the state's all about. You want to limit coercion as much as possible in a civilized society. So that means it ought to have a police force to protect you from coercion and violence within the country, an army to protect you from coercion outside the country, and a court system to adjudicate disputes without resorting to violence. So if there was to be a state at all in Argentina, Milei would tell you those three things are the most it should do. But the thing is that he's going to be under so much pressure by so many people that are in the deep state, that are profiting, stealing, I should say, from the current situation. Is he going to roll over? Well, he's got money. He doesn't need to steal anything, which is the main reason why people go into politics. I'm convinced of that all over the world. Answer to the question: has he been bought and paid for? The answer is no. And I think he will continue to fire government employees. I don't say government workers, because in this country, they actually don't work. They have the job and pick up the paycheck and don't even go into the office a lot of the time. I mean, it's a scandal. Everybody in Argentina knows how corrupt the system is. Everybody knows that. Yeah, he's going to continue along the way. And what should you do about it? I think that uh, property prices here are so cheap right now that I own a lot of property, regrettably, perhaps. Well, maybe now not so regrettably, here in Argentina. And we could see a 5x or even a 10x in property uh, in the years to come. It could happen. So if any of your listeners are looking for a place that is actually delightful to live, extraordinarily cheap, I think the cost of living here, all in, is probably 20% of what it is in London, maybe less, I don't know. Um, uh, with capital gains on property that you buy, yeah, Argentina is a really good bet right now. And I could give you examples of other countries that have free marketized in a much milder way. Well, Britain under Thatcher, there's an example. You know, Britain in the 60s and 70s, it was a dump. It was embarrassing. It really was. And what the reforms that Thatcher made so greatly improved Britain. Chile, I mean, it was a backward mining province before Pinochet brought the Chicago boys in, and in a matter of a relatively few years, it became by far the most prosperous and advanced country in Latin America. So, yeah, answer to the question, I'm very optimistic for Argentina, although this is still Argentina, anything can happen.
Yeah, it seems to be maybe comparable to when the Berlin Wall collapsed in Eastern Europe in the early 90s. I think if you had bought property in Prague and other places, and that would have been a good time. It feels like the same kind of turning point. It's interesting you mentioned Pinochet because some of the viewers made a comment the other day because I said I was going to interview and they said, oh, Doug is saying, saying Pinochet was good even though he killed loads of people. But my thought is he might have killed 2,000 people or something, and I'm not downplaying that, but he did a lot better for Chile than, let's say, Fidel Castro did for Cuba. And Fidel Castro killed loads of people. And look at
lot more than Pinochet.
yeah,
But Fidel and Che are heroes, and
yeah.
Pinochet is uh, the devil. And anyway, by South American standards, 2,000 people in a revolution is a rounding error. I mean, here in Argentina, under the generals, they say, nobody knows, someplace in between 10 and maybe 30,000, but I don't think it's that high. People were killed under the generals. Even in Uruguay, the kindest and gentlest country in Latin America, under the generals, 500. In Brazil, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how many,
Brazil
you
in
know,
the 60s and 70s with the generals as well. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. So let's
But Pinochet, everybody hates Pinochet because he free marketized the country. That's why they hate Pinochet. It is, actually.
and it's interesting because he was a friend of Margaret Thatcher. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. Let's look at the questions. This is from Frank Rizzo, 4399. How would one go about taking advantage of a large spike in the price of silver if your entire holdings aren't physical? And he said, thanks, really enjoy listening to Doug.
Okay. Well, you can buy a futures contract in silver, of course, uh, and you don't have to do it on 5 or 10% margin. So that's one way to get extreme leverage for silver, but it's risky because people that trade futures that are not professionals do tend to over leverage and then something happens, it goes down and they're squeezed out and they lose everything. So you could say, well, you could buy silver mining stocks, but are there really any good ones? Because all the silver mining stocks, they're lead, zinc, copper stocks as well, or gold stocks that have a silver component. And so the best way, I don't know, what do you think, Mario? What would you suggest other than futures for a leveraged way to buy silver?
He's saying that if he had physical, but uh I traded futures in gold and silver back in 2004 to 2005 to 2008, and I did well. And it's not easy, but what I did is if I bought one futures contract, I had almost the whole amount in the brokerage account. I didn't just put, let's say, $5,000 down. So you can do the futures, but I mean, if he's already got physical, um, I mean, I would say that if gold spikes and he thinks other assets are more interesting than silver, excuse me, then he could, swap that for another asset. I think that's maybe what he's asking. And
Well, here's a thought. There's at least one, probably several silver ETFs, and they're stocks that all they just own silver, but you can trade them like stocks, not like commodities, and therefore you can buy the stock on margin, depending on what the margin requirements are. So that's an intelligently leveraged way to play silver, perhaps.
yeah, and I think a lot of the viewers they like the physical, but if you want to speculate, maybe have some physical and maybe get the ETF, even though I don't have the ETF. I've just been buying silver since 2003 whenever I can physical. But yeah. So there's another question here, Doug, from let's see, Silver EN7KL. What comes first, crack up boom from the general population realizing our dollar is worthless, or riots in every major North American and European city when the general population realize the armed candy is killing them?
Or maybe both at once. I mean, they go
Yeah.
hand in glove with each other, quite frankly. Uh, yeah, I've recently said that if I was a betting man, and I guess I am a betting man, I like to play poker for amusement sometimes. So yeah, I like to bet. I think that 2024 is going to turn out to be one of the worst, if not the worst year in most people's living memory. So I think it's a sorry prospect we're looking at right now. And will there be riots and so forth in the streets? Well, it's not happening right now. So yeah, I think it's a good bet. In fact, the public loves stocks, and I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Next question from Don Warland. Doug, the term Peronists is somewhat understood, but how how and did this group alter Argentina's economic and legal system? I know of some era of Argentina's rise. Then with Peron period, sources get harder to sift through.
Well, okay, it's a little bit unclear, but uh, Argentina 100 years ago was one of the most prosperous countries in the world. Uh, if you were a European who wanted to leave the old country, maybe you'd go to the US or Canada or Argentina because it had tremendous returns. The standard of living was very high. And then I think it started with a president named Irigoyen in the 20s, who started in increasing the size of the state. And then Juan Perón got into office during World War II, really, and followed the path that Mussolini had laid out for Italy. And it's been straight downhill ever since then. So with stops along the way, the Menem regime, I mean, it wasn't so long ago, this country, it was impossible to get a telephone. And if you got a telephone, it was one of those black Bakelite dial phones. This was only like in the 80s when that was true. So Menem improved things, but not basically, just a few things around the edges. And then more recently, the last fellow, Macri, uh, made some further improvements, refilled the piggy bank, which when the Kirchnerites were reelected, they took advantage of that to steal and spend. But no, this is a major change, hopefully, with Milei. Radical change.
Okay.
Argentina has always been the most outward looking and the most westward oriented of all the Latin American countries.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
remember.
the best candidate. That's why I took a bet on Argentina years ago. Way premature, I gotta say, but
I mean, I remember growing up in Brazil in the early 70s or mid 70s. You used to hear, see people driving around cars with Argentinian license plates. They came as a tourist to Rio, and people would call our Argentinians gringos, which is a term used for Americans. And only because they were still seen back then as, wealthy Argentinians, but now things have seemed to switched around. Anyway, uh, let's see. Michaela Abbott 222, is the Western unipolar system mentality fair to the emerging markets by imposing another form of colonialism upon them, i.e., elimination of cheap fuel sources? I guess she's talking about this new green agenda and how it will hurt the emerging markets.
yeah, the green agenda is basically a scam. It's a fraud. Uh, you cannot run with current technology uh, an industrial society on the sun and the wind. Uh, it just doesn't work. I'm not opposed to wind and solar power. They're fine for special applications, remote areas, maybe to supplement your own personal house's electricity supply. Nothing wrong with it. And the technology keeps improving. But to try to impose green power on an industrial society is going to amount to deindustrializing the Western world with a massive collapse in the standard of living. Uh, it's really quite stupid. If you need power, by far the safest and the cheapest and the cleanest form of mass power generation is nuclear power. And I can, and all three of those things that I said, safe, clean, cheap, clean, people say, no, none of that's true. Well, all three of them are true or should be true and can be true. And I can explain them. But we're not here to talk about nuclear power. But nuclear power is the answer, not windmills and solar panels.
Yeah, I mean, I agree about the nuclear power angle, and I've even done a few promotional videos for some nuclear energy companies. Anyway, we're gonna do another three questions, Doug, as we're approaching the hour mark. The first one of the last three is um, do you know who are the largest stockholders? Oh, and this is from David Veach 54. Do you know who are the largest stockholders of the pirate corporations and also who own the Fed? And if they wish to reset again, but this time with a back backdoored cryptocurrency for total slavery?
Hmm. That's that question is a little bit unclear to me, but yeah, the Fed, when it was founded, is half owned by the US government and half by major banks. But there's little distinction between the two of them because in a fascist system that we live in, and I use fascist not in the way that the street demonstrators use it, but it's fascism is a word that Mussolini coined. He coined that, and it's the perfect melding of corporations with the state. So yes, the Fed is technically a fascist organization, and I think the second part of the question has something to do with the CBDCs, where they're going to be coming out with digital currencies run by central banks. And these things are an utter catastrophe from the point of view of freedom of the average individual. What it means is if we have a digital currency and you buy and sell everything through your iPhone or the like, the government will know absolutely everything that you're buying or selling or that you own or that you have. I mean, it's a catastrophe from the point of view of individual freedom, and it should be fought tooth and nail. Uh, I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I agree with you on the cryptocurrencies. And I think it's also related to a digital passport, and if we go further back 150, 200 years, people didn't need passports, but I guess technology and all the increased travel from continent to continent, uh, made the state issue passports, and I think it's just an evolution. So I,
Mario, I'll mention that it wasn't so long ago that I used to travel on a World Service Authority travel document, which was a private passport printed up by a guy named Gary Davis, who has an interesting story. Uh, he renounced his U.S. citizenship after World War II, found he couldn't go anywhere. He was in France. So he printed up his own private passport. And I have used it to travel to where? Honduras, Costa Rica, Peru, Iceland, French Polynesia, uh, where it was accepted. It looked very much like a great looking passport. And I was turned away with interesting results in other countries. But now, of course, forget about it because all these governments are hooked up by computer and so forth. But no, I, I hate the idea of passports. And you don't have to worry about keeping migrants out if they don't have passports, because today what draws migrants in is the welfare benefits of countries. If you abolished welfare benefits of all types, which should be done, uh, if people came to England or the US, they'd be they'd be the best people, not people that were looking for a free ride when they got
like
there.
back in the 1800s when, millions of Europeans went to US, Argentina, or even Brazil. There's no welfare state back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they had to produce and save if they wanted to get somewhere. It's no longer the case with
No.
welfare payments.
So here we go. The penultimate question from General Stack 6540. Have you read The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb? Does he believe the end game will likely result in hyperinflation or hyperdeflation?
Mhm. Well, actually, later this afternoon, I'm going to talk to Webb, and we've been promoting his free book through our sources. Basically, that book, The Great Taking, and maybe you'll link to it, Mario, because it's worth reading, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that you did something back in September about it, and I caught on to it, and I did a video as well about it, and I've read it. I've also bought the hard copy because I want to have a hard copy, and I did a video on it, and it has more than 70,000 views. So, and like Mr. Webb says, It's one of the possibilities. It doesn't mean that it will happen, but it's quite scary how they kind of put this through over the decades, without anyone really putting two and two together until he did it.
Yeah, you're quite correct. So it's worth reading the book or watching the video. Um, and it does relate to what, that criminal Klaus Schwab of the WEF says, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And the bottom line is that your securities, your stocks and bonds are may not really be yours.
Yeah, I think that's the moral of that book and the lesson. Um, Last one here from Mark Rangers 1423. And I just wanted to let the viewers know you had a lot more questions, but there's a limit. So, but Doug, if you had to pick one of these three places, which city would you live in and why? New York, London, or Paris?
Hmm. Which of the three would I pick? Hmm. Well, I like them all. Um, they all have problems. They all have advantages. Do I have to choose just between those between those three? I mean,
I mean, you can maybe you have some other ones.
listen, if it's a question of a big city, if you want a big city with the highest standard of living and the lowest cost of living, I'm in it right now, Buenos Aires. Um, if you want a city that I'm a big fan of of the Orient, Southeast Asia. Thailand in particular, I think is great. If you want a big city there, Bangkok is fine. But why choose a big city to start with? I mean, and then you got to ask yourself, well, what country do I want to be in? Is there any country in the world that is going in the right direction at this time? Uh, Listen, we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
Pros
I
and
mean,
cons of various things.
it's hard because, I mean, in my case, my great grandfather went from Italy to Brazil, and I think it was fine there until the 1950s or 60s, and then it went downhill. And I'm here in the UK since 1992. It's been pretty good for me here in London, and now it's not as good, but I think you've spoken about that you can thrive, and there's opportunities everywhere, even in Argentina. And maybe Argentina is the country that's turning around right now, while all the other countries are going the way of Argentina.
Yeah, and it depends on what you want out of a city. Now, if I was a young European or American and was looking to make my fortune and was very enterprising and bold, I would probably go to Kinshasa in the Congo. I mean, why? Because if you're trying to make it, you don't want to be on a level playing field where there are 100 million other people just like you fighting. If I went to the Congo as a young man, I would be very unusual. I would have connections. I would have capital. I would have experiences that very, very few other people in the city have, and I could leverage those quite easily. So there are many answers to that question. I think out of those three cities you mentioned, Paris would be the least desirable. Highest taxes, most regulations, most racial problems. I think between New York and London, I don't know. It's a toss up.
Great, Doug. Thank you very much for your time. It was great to meet you for the first time, and yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, very much, Mario. I enjoyed this, and let me wish everybody a Merry Christmas, which I understand is politically incorrect to do these days.
Yeah, I mean, I've interviewed for other people, and I put it as a Merry Christmas, a Christmas special interview. Um, I don't see why we shouldn't say Christmas.
Because Western civilization is being overthrown. So
Yeah.
I guess that's reason.
And I think it's from within, isn't it? Really?
It is. And to wish somebody Merry Christmas doesn't mean that you are you know, a Christian fanatic. I mean, I'm not a religious person at all. It's just a very nice tradition.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Doug, again, and enjoy your Christmas in Buenos Aires.
Thanks, Mario. Talk to you in the future.